We're talking Houston Texans football on the Our Football Network. And whenever we talk about the Houston Texans, we bring in this gentleman here, Cole Thompson. Cole, how's it going?
Greg, it's a beautiful bye week over here. There's nothing nonsensical going on. Every player is just following orders and doing right, and no suspensions, no conversations on players being ejected. We got nothing of that. It's the last week of the bye weeks before we get into an 11-day period of nonstop football. But yeah, it was just a very easy, relaxed week down here. Very fun.
Yeah. Does every team have to go through that like 3-11? Because I know that as a Jet fan, I know that they had to go through that earlier this year. You're going through it. So is that what everybody has to go through, one of those 3 games in 11 days kind of deals?
Oh, it's fantastic that no, they don't. Usually it's like 3 games in a 17-day period.
Yeah,
and you'll usually throw in, like a team that you don't expect to be very good this year. Not like the Miami Dolphins with an offense that's headlined by a resurgent Tua Tagovailoa. And then you get to go travel to go play against the defending Super Bowl champions in Kansas City. And then, 4 days later, Beyonce's coming to town and she's not paying attention to the Texans. No, she's probably paying attention to the Ravens, who still have 2 players that are in the running for Offensive Player of the Year and one that's in the running for an MVP. All within an 11-day span, definitely fun. This is the Texans unfortunately shot themselves in the foot when it came to the game against Tennessee, because this is where the meat of the schedule is going to truly, I think, depict what this roster is going into the postseason.
Yeah, I remember Mark Lawrence, who he does a lot of shows for us. He actually is the one who publishes this magazine. And he mentioned that because he has all sorts of like really awesome trends, historical handicapping trends. And he talked about how the Houston Texans, if you look at it, statistically speaking, any team that triples their win total from one year to the next will always come back to the mean. Always. Yep. And that's what we're seeing with Houston this year. But luckily, they're in a weak division this year. So it really doesn't matter what they do. They're going to win the division. I know the Colts are hanging around, but the Colts aren't going to catch the Texans. We know that.
Well, here's the thing, Greg. So number one, the Colts can't catch the Texans because of the tiebreaker. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it both finished 4-2 in conference play. Even if the Colts were to get to the playoffs, because of the Texans have the sweep over Indianapolis, they get the head. They automatically win the division. So that's a done deal. You brought up the division in general. There is a scenario where this weekend, if Indianapolis loses and if Tennessee loses, and next weekend, if Indianapolis loses again, Houston, that doesn't play another division game until week 18, they would clinch the division because of just the way that the division rivalries work and the way that the schedule is paid out. But this is not a great team when it comes to the reality of what we expected at the start of the year to what it is now. And I got a lot of flack in the offseason saying, just remind yourself that we saw this unfold 2 years ago with Jacksonville. Jacksonville was a team that tripled its win total underneath a brand new head coach, underneath a new resurgent at quarterback, a guy that a lot of people had hoped that could be the difference maker. They won a playoff game against a quality opponent that was the actual favorite, despite being a wild card team in Los Angeles. They dominated in one quarter, and they made things really interesting against the opposing team in the final 30 minutes on the road in the divisional round. Well, Houston went and played against Cleveland at home, and they dominated that game against a really, for my money, quality roster in the Cleveland Browns. They then go play against Baltimore on the road at M&T Bank Stadium, and they make it an interesting quarter, the first half, not the second half, the way that Jacksonville did against Kansas City, and they end up losing in the divisional round. And so then they go out in the offseason, and what happened last year? Well, Jacksonville went and they got a wide receiver that they traded for that they thought was going to be a difference maker from the jump. That was Calvin Ridley. Now, Calvin Ridley, again, they traded for him beforehand when he was suspended for the entire year, but still they traded for a wide receiver that they thought was going to be a difference maker. Houston went out and they traded for Stephon Diggs. They had a young playmaker that they just paid a lot of money to, Nico Collins, Christian Kirk. They also trusted that they brought in a new run game headlined by Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne, Dameon Pierce, and Joe Mixon. And so now all the similarities are there, and then you got to throw in the fact that, now they have a first place schedule. And what happened? They went 9-8. They were 8-3 going into the bye week. They then lost 2 games back-to-back. They could have clinched the division, one in overtime, and then one, I think it was down to the wire against Cleveland, if I'm not mistaken. And actually, that was the game to where we saw the revival of Joe Flacco's career. That was the moment where Flacco mania took case out in Cleveland and they started going on their run. And so then they finished the year 9-8. They missed the playoffs. And everyone says, well, what's happening? What's going on? Why are we, seeing regression? It's like, because if you were a team that overexceeded expectations in year one and you didn't worry about building on that foundation moving forward. That's the Texans. Yeah. The Texans went 10-7. They had a very lackluster fourth place schedule in 2023. They had a quarterback that nobody knew how to prepare for because if he had only played 15 games of NFL football, they didn't have a good run game, but they were able to make up for it by a great passing attack headlined by Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz. They had a defense that was playing better down the stretch. They were healthy down the stretch, and they were going up against opponents that were finding ways to shoot themselves in the foot as much as they were improving. And so now we talk about this Texans team, and the struggles are there, and there's inconsistency on the offense, and the offensive line still is a turnstile, and CJ Stroud is getting sacked, and the turnovers are starting to stockpile, and they aren't able to score in the second half. And everyone's going, well, what happened to this Texan team that was supposed to be a playoff threat and go compete alongside Buffalo and Kansas City and Baltimore? And I'm looking at all of them and saying, what do you mean that they were supposed to? Like, I need you to actually break that down to me. What do you mean they were supposed to? Because there was no factual evidence of consistent growth the way that we saw in Buffalo. There's no factual consistent evidence that there's growth the way that we saw in Kansas City. There's no factual evidence of consistent growth the way that we saw in Baltimore. We saw a team get really hot last year, and then they said, we're going to go all in and just build around our quarterback. And they built no foundation. And so now they're going into the final 4 games of the regular season without one of their star linebackers, because if you suspend it for 3 games, with question marks on the offensive line, with question marks when it comes to the wide receiver core outside of Nico Collins. And thank God they play in a crap division, because they very well may finish 9-8, and 9-8 is good enough to get you in the playoffs when you play in the AFC South.
That's right. That is the difference, is that unlike Jacksonville, Houston doesn't have to worry about a hot team that is going to knock them out. So that means Houston is in really good shape. They're playoff bound, unless there's some sort of major collapse or
they're playoff. I say they're playoff bound for the time being. If you look at the numbers this morning, I actually just did an article on it. They have an 81% chance of making the playoff. They have to win one more game to almost guarantee their spot in postseason.
Yeah, I mean, 81. I'm surprised. That's a little low for me. It should be like 95%.
I thought it was going to be a lot higher when I saw it.
Yeah. So, all right. So, Houston, tell me specific players that have not advanced, progressed the way that you thought that they would this year.
I think Tank Dell is probably the first name that comes on up, and I'm not sure what the reasoning is. Is it because of the NFL has found a way to be able to better block him? Is it because of they're utilizing him on the outside when maybe because of his frame he should be playing inside? He's more of a consistent number 2 receiver than he ever was a number 1. But Dell right now has 543 receiving yards. He only has 2 touchdowns. He's averaging 12.6 yards per play. He has 43 catches. And you look at his numbers last year, in roughly the same amount of games, because he only played 11 last year. He's played 12 this year. He had 709 yards. So the numbers have gone down. The yards per catch have gone down by 3 yards. The drops have gone up. The targets are roughly about the same, and the catches are roughly about the same. The big difference is it comes to the touchdowns. He has 2 right now versus 7 when he was a rookie. And I think that there's a symbolism where you aren't seeing the production and the growth of maybe a John Mechie or an Xavier Hutchinson the way that you really wanted to where now teams are not playing double coverage against, they're playing man coverage against just Nico Collins, and then they're not doubling up a Tank Dell anymore, and they can win those one-on-one battles because of they feel comfortable that they don't have to worry about it. The loss of Stephon Diggs was really big. Diggs opened up the offense in so many different ways because of his versatility. And when they lost Nico Collins for those 4 games, that really hindered the success of what the rest of the offense was. And then right afterwards, it was, I think 2 games later against Indianapolis, then you lose Diggs. And so now you're asking Dell to step on up in a variety of ways to where it's very hit and miss at times. You think that he can be a really good overall number 2 receiver, but when they start to put pressure on him, he sometimes underwhelms. I think CJ has underwhelmed this year. And that's not an insult because he probably is the entire reason why this offense is humming in any capacity. Sure. But still, his completion percentage has dropped by 5%. He's thrown for over 3,100 yards, but still, last year he threw for over 4,000 yards. His touchdown to interception ratio last year was 23-5. Right now it's 15-9. He's throwing more into double coverage. When you see him make one mistake, another one is close behind. He's currently under duress. He's no longer making those quick reads like he did in week 1, now that we're in week 13 or week 14, where you'd watch him maybe throw the ball out of bounds just to hit the reset button, get back to the line of scrimmage and try and hit and rework the play.
Yeah.
Instead, he's trying to extend plays longer. And when you look at the sack total this year, he's been sacked 41 times. I would say probably about 75% are on the offensive line. The other 25% is on him holding the football too long because if you watch and he goes back through his 3-step drawback and he's fine. And you watch and he goes through his 7-step drawback and he's still making plays and he still is delivering and he still has time. And instead of just stepping up in the pocket and taking and running and moving forward, he just decides to stand back there and wait for a play to unfold. Yeah. And sometimes that's a bad move because of what you're doing is you're allowing an offensive lineman an opportunity to give up a play and they're going to get the blame for it. And in Houston, because of the franchise dealt with the Deshaun Watson saga, they had Matt Schaub as their starting quarterback. They had Brock Osweiler as their starting quarterback. A lot of people here don't want to listen to the fact that CJ is showing signs of regression because they believe that they got the jackpot. And Stroud is a great quarterback. He's definitely top 12 in the NFL. I don't think anybody's arguing that. But you say that he's at fault at times. He's throwing into double coverage. Well, the offensive line wasn't giving him protection.
Yeah.
Really? When he has 7 seconds to throw the football, the offensive line wasn't giving him protection? Well, the wide receiver missed the route. The wide receiver cuts perfectly at the right time before CJ even lets the ball loose, and he's just throwing behind him. That's on the wide receiver. So there's a lot of, I think, sensitivity whenever talking about Stroud because of who he is as a player and what he means to the organization. But there has been some regression. The entire offensive line has been bad. From I think Laramie Tunsil, if you're looking at this from a perspective of who is back next year guaranteed a starting spot, Laramie Tunsil. And Tunsil, he has his faults. He's the most penalized offensive tackle in the NFL. He leads the league in false starts. I mean, that's just a fact. And it's a second consecutive year. But Greg, what would you rather have? A potential all-pro left tackle that you're going to lose 5 yards on per game?
No problem.
And maybe he's going to give up 1 sack every 5 games, or a dude that's going to become a turnstile and get your quarterback killed.
Sure.
But Titus Howard has been hit and miss almost every single game this year. Juice Scruggs was starting at center because of the fact that they lost Kenyon Green. They had to move him to guard. His first 2 games at guard were awful. I mean, almost unwatchable, that bad. But he just had a really good game against Jacksonville, going up against Eric Armstead and going up against Trayvon Walker. Maybe this is the turnaround that you want to see. Okay. Jared Patterson, very hit and miss. He's got that kind of mean mug mentality. He was an All-American during his time at Notre Dame. He had a really, really, really good game against Tennessee. Had a horrendous game against Jacksonville. So you're watching the hit and miss. And then Shaq Mason, this is a guy that I think has finally hit that wall of this is who I am as a player, kind of past my prime. We're going to have to make some moves in the offseason. All the guaranteed money on his current contract is paid up. It wouldn't be shocked to see him be moved off of. Blake Fisher, the Notre Dame tackle that they brought in, kind of a swing guy right now, still getting acclimated to the NFL. They need to get him because if they need to bring in some stability on the offensive line just for depth purposes. But nobody has really stood out this year other than Tunsil. And Tunsil, again, you still have those faults. You still have those minor issues when it comes to his pass pro, when it comes to his run blocking. Joe Mixon has been a godsend. I would like to say right now that Joe Mixon is more than anything else the MVP of this team. And it's really shocking to say that, Greg. I know because if he's a running back, but when you think back about how Cincinnati doesn't have a consistent run game right now and how much pressure they're putting on Joe Burrow. Yeah. And then you look at the Texans and how they're sitting at 8-5 with a running back that's averaging 4.4 yards per play. He has 11 touchdowns on the year. He has 205 carries, and he's only played in 10 games. So he missed 3 games because of the injury on his hamstring. And I mean, on his hip. His ankle. My apologies. He has 9 runs of over 25 yards or more. He also is averaging 88.9 yards per game. That is history for Houston. They have not had a 1,000-yard rusher since 2019. That's going to break this year so long as Joe Mixon can stay healthy down the stretch. They're averaging as a unit 4.9 yards per play. 4.4 yards per play rushing. Last year, they were averaging 3.8. I mean, they've doubled their original. And this is with a guy that currently is basically the bell cow back and hasn't missed a beat. And they signed him to a 3-year extension thinking that this was malpractice for a running back. Well, the resurgence of running backs like Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry have headline free agency running backs. Joe Mixon is pulling up the rear in third place right now because of the trade and the signee to bring him on in, because of just how consistent he has been. And so I think you got to give a lot of flowers there. He has those expectations offensively. The play calling has been putrid in the second half of games, and that's on Bobby Slowick. That's on the execution. Greg, I'm going to tell you a stat. In the last 8 games for Houston, they have only had 2 performances where they have scored multiple touchdowns in the final 30 minutes. In the final 30 minutes of games, both were against teams that have already been eliminated from the playoff conversation in Jacksonville and New England. So there's a lot of problems with the offense.
Yeah, that's not good. That's not good for his potential resume either, as far as getting a head coaching job. I think that's going to be postponed for at least one more offseason, based on how that sounds. So what is the fix, you believe, if they're gonna wind up winning a couple of playoff games this season, if that is entirely possible? But if they do, what do you think happens? We'll start first on offense, of course, and then we'll go to defense. And by the way, are we done now with Kenyon Green? I know you mentioned is because
okay. I don't know for sure. He's no longer guaranteed to be a starter. I don't know if they'll trade him in the offseason. They'll outright release him. If he'll come back and he'll compete for a 53-man roster spot. He's not a starter anymore. Let's just go with that.
Okay.
But here's the thing. There was a moment after the New York Jets game when he went out with the shoulder injury and he was wrote off for the rest of the year, where you watched the next few games against Detroit. You watched it against Tennessee. And the run blocking was almost unwatchable. It was so horrendously bad. And you got to remember that when he was at Texas A&M, he was viewed as a potential first-round pick, not for his pass protection, but for his run blocking. And now you have to go back and remember, well, Joe Mixon was averaging over 102 yards when they had Kenyon Green as the lead blocker. So I feel like that there's going to be a scenario where Nick Caserio believes that he can at least get something out of him as a run blocker. Maybe they bring him on in for certain plays. Maybe they at least let him compete, try to raise his value, and then maybe trade him right before the end of the roster cut down days next offseason so they can get a draft pick and compensation in return. It will probably be like a 6th or 7th round pick. But you and I both know, Greg, the value of offensive linemen is second to none. Even if you're a below average to almost unplayable offensive lineman, you're going to cost a pretty penny because of the depth reasons.
Yep.
So I don't know if he's done just yet. He is done as the starting left guard for the Houston Texans going into 2024, bearing an injury or bearing a free agent signing or them completely whiffing on the draft.
So what do they have to do to improve the offense to win a couple of playoff games? Because it sounds like there's a lot that has to be done. But if you just point to one thing, is it CJ Stroud? Is it the play calling?
It's a lot. Can I start off with the easy bait here? Get the right playoff matchup. Like that would be just number one.
Sure.
Playing again.
Who is that right now? Where are they? So
right now it's the Chargers. Right now the Chargers are
the Chargers. Okay, well that's probably not a good.
I don't know. No, because here's the thing. Because the way that their secondary is playing, you can actually trust with how bad the wide receivers outside of Ladd McConkey have been for Los Angeles. If you just stop the run and you're able to put up some points and not throw to triple coverage, you feel really good about that matchup. Denver's right behind them as the 6th seed right now. And it's like Denver, Bo Nix. Can you get him to throw into double coverage as a young player making those mental mistakes?
That's much more favorable, yeah.
But like Pittsburgh is a team to where they have currently the division lead. But if somehow they start losing and Baltimore takes the division and they end up having the head-to-head, Houston would still be in the 4 seed. Pittsburgh's a matchup that I don't think is going to bode well in Houston's favor because if they can control the clock, their offensive line has been good enough to be able to create opportunities for Najee Harris and for Jaylen Warren. They're making sure that Russell Wilson isn't throwing into bad coverage. He's actually looked vastly. he had a 400-yard game last week against Cincinnati. Like that's vintage Russ that I never thought we would see again. And their defense is elite. Like here's the problem with Pittsburgh, and I don't mean to get off topic yet. There are so many Steelers fans that want Mike Tomlin fired because they're just so tired of being stuck in limbo. And I'm like,
it's ridiculous.
I'm like, guys, you're at 9-3 going into the month of December. Like, you really want to fire this? You have Russell Wilson as your starting quarterback and you're 9-3. I don't want to hear it. This man would be there would be teams that would fire their coach after a really good season just to get Mike Tomlin.
Sure.
The play calling has got to be better in the second half. And I think it's got to be more up-tempo. I think what you have to do is you have to not give so many avenues to where Stroud is going to be under duress and throwing under pressure and having to maneuver outside the pocket.
Does that mean they have to run more?
I think that running is going to benefit them if you can create running lanes. So you got to see more consistency from Juice Scruggs at the guard position. You got to see more consistency from Shaq Mason at the guard position. Because if they can create those running lanes, then Joe Mixon has proven this year his body is still very healthy. He's not afraid to go ahead and lower his shoulder and get those hard contact yards. He's utilizing his advantages to being a physical runner in the open space. So all that aside, he's in a really, really good spot when it comes to that moment. But I think you have to have more quick up tempo, whether that be screen passes to John Mechie, whether that means lining Tank Dell up in the slot, letting him utilize his speed in the open space, throwing some jump balls to get Nico Collins more involved. But you have to be able to kind of, I think, have an identity of what you want to do with the football within your three-step drawback. So as you're going through your progression, you already have a very good indication. I'm going to target Dalton Schultz in the slot. I'm going to go target Tank Dell on the outside. I'm going to get the ball to Nico Collins. And you can't second guess yourself. If there's coverage, you got to tuck and run. You have to be able to play of a more sped up offense, because the more time that you give the defense to kind of pull those little chinks in the armor and make them sporadically expanded, it becomes a concern and it becomes a major issue for this team. And so
and the more time you give CJ, that's not where you want him.
No, it's a terrible look.
Yeah, that'll end up in a sack. By the way, you mentioned Mechie. How's he done this season?
For what he is, I think that it's been a really good year. You know, you thought that he was going to be the wide receiver number 4, number 5. He's been that dude for the most part. 15 catches, almost 200 yards. Finally found his way to the end zone. I mean, he's averaging 17 yards a play. So when they get the football in his hand, he's making a lot of plays as a dude that you expect to be a wide receiver 3. And they are going to do everything possible to give him the opportunity to prove he is the long-term option in the slot. Like they were never going to cut him this offseason. There were so many rumors and speculations that maybe they'll trade him to Carolina, maybe they'll send him to Baltimore, maybe they'll give him a fresh start elsewhere. CJ loves him. Like, CJ and him are extremely close. And Stroud was going to make sure that there was a way to keep him on the roster, even if he was inactive, even if he was having to learn how to replay the position, whatever it was going to be, they were going to make sure that he had a role. And he had that really good game against the Los Angeles Rams in the what was it? In the preseason game, the last preseason game. Okay. And he scored 2 touchdowns and he had like 115 yards. And then he had that game where he came on in for Stephon Diggs. And he scored his first touchdown against Detroit. And you're like, okay, new version of John Mechie. I think that that's all you're going to expect at this point. 4 to 5 targets per game, anywhere between 40 to 55 yards. Maybe you'll get a couple first downs. He can be a weapon that you maybe find in the end zone, like every once in a blue moon. But your main 2 guys, if you were to ask me in the progression of the pecking order of who is what when we target them, the first read is always going to be Nico Collins. The second read is always going to be Tank Dell. The third read, it feels like right now, is going to be Joe Mixon or Dare Ogunbowale out of the backfield. The fourth read is going to be Dalton Schultz. The fifth read is going to be John Mechie. Doesn't mean that it can't work, but Mechie still is the last one on the pecking order as of this point.
Okay. Well, that's not what you are looking at for a second-round draft pick, but he's still got a long way to go. Still only a pup. Okay,
he's a very good player, and he's a great route runner, which I think is always going to keep him involved in the offensive game plan.
He needs to stay healthy for a few years. That's it. Yeah. Stay healthy for a few years, and that'll get him going. All right. So on defense, there have been some disappointments for sure. I mean, like if you go anyone in the interior defensive line, from what you saw last year with Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins to this year. Oh yeah, big difference. Yeah.
With Foley Fotokasi and Tim Settle, it's a giant difference. You figured, so the problem is that they knew that they were going to spend money on a defensive end. They knew that Jonathan Grenard was not going to be back in 2025. So they figured, let's go swing big. Let's see what we can go get. Danielle Hunter want to come back to the state of Texas. That was a very big deal for him. There had been rumors for a few seasons that he was going to go to Dallas. There were rumors that Dallas was going to make a trade to bring him on in and pair with DeMarcus Lawrence. He's from Houston. He grew up in Katy, which is 25 miles outside of downtown Houston. He's very close. His family really, really is important to him. Very big into his heritage. Want to come play in front of his family, want to be around, played at LSU. They were able to go make the trip every Saturday, 6-hour car ride. It wasn't that big of a deal. So they bring him on in. But naturally, again, this is one of the best defensive linemen that is probably one of the most underrated of the 21st century. The guy is going to finish this year with over 155 tackles for losses, and he's going to be pushing 100 career sacks, and he's not even 31. We don't talk about him the way that we talk about Von Miller, and we don't talk about him the way that we talk about Max Crosby, or the way that we've been talking about Trey Hendrickson, or even guys of years past. He is probably the modern day Cliff Averill for my money, where really good, solid production, yet he never got the accolades that he probably deserved. And so when they paid for him, they had to kind of short-sight themselves by paying for a defensive tackle, which came with Foley Fotkowski, which came with Tim Settle, which came with Mario Edwards. Edwards got slapped with a 4-game suspension. That really hurt them because if he was probably their best interior defensive lineman at the time, Settle has stepped on up, and he's been a really good addition for the run defense. He's had some struggles when it comes to the pass rush. Foley Fotkowski has been hit and miss on both. Now he's dealing with a toe injury. He's missed the last 2 games, so he hasn't been healthy. And then you have guys like Tommy Togiai, who was a practice squad player that they had to elevate, and Kurt Heinisch, that also was dealing with an injury and took forever to come off the IR. So all these things aside, the interior defensive line position has been very underwhelming, but surprisingly, it hasn't really affected this team when it comes to their run defense as a whole. They've actually been, for my money, still one of the better run defenses in the NFL. I think currently they rank number 11 or 12. They're giving up 106 yards per game. Really, the performance that you saw a few weeks ago. What was it? What did we see?
Tennessee?
Yeah, Tennessee game. Tony Pollard. Yeah, so Tony Pollard's performance was probably the last time that we saw a big, big breakaway kind of game. Really massive that affected the outcome of the sport.
What about the rookies and the whole class in general? But Lassiter has been the one that's been making the most positive impact, it seems. So how's the class been in general?
Bullock's improving a lot. Lassiter when he was drafted, I think we talked about this in the fall, at the very beginning of all the year. They expected he was going to be the starting nickel. They thought that Jalen Pitre was going to stay at the safety position. They were going to move Lassiter inside. They brought in Jeff Okudah, former number 3 overall pick. They figured he was going to be the starting nickel. So he ended up balling out throughout all of OTAs, throughout all of minicamp, throughout all of training camp. And so they put him on the outside, which allowed Jalen Pitre to move to the nickel, which meant that a guy like Kalen Bullock had to have a more substantial role. And he has. And the thing that he has been really good at is playing in coverage. He is one of the best fluid man coverage guys vertically downfield. He leads the team in interceptions before. He's created, I think, 6 pass breakups. He's also improved as a tackler. He had the play last week against Parker Washington. It was like a gain of 39 yards from Mac Jones. And he saves a touchdown by just diving and throwing his body out there. The problem is that he can't wrap up. So there's some things he's got to work on, but he's made some plays. He has actually been, for my money, one of the more underappreciated rookies overall in the NFL this year. Lassiter dealt with the concussion, so he missed a game. He missed a very important game in week 11. Who was that against? Why am I blanking? Anyways, not important. But he was up. He's been really consistent when playing against number 2 receivers. The problem is that there have been times this year where he has gone up against number 1 receivers, and you see those rookie mistakes. You go back and you watch the game against the New York Jets. 4th down call, Devontae Adams just puts him in a blender. I mean, literally, good first step, already lost the battle. Boom, off, gets a big play, comes down with the football, they convert, they get the touchdown on the following play, goes up against Garrett Wilson in man coverage, Wilson makes the one-handed grab at the back of the end zone, arguably the catch of the year. Last year's the one in coverage because you have Derek Stingley covering against Devontae Adams on that play. So there's been some growing pains with him, but he's a really good cornerback for what you see for the style of defense that is going to
Sure.
continue to translate. I always believe that cornerback is the toughest position to translate from the collegiate level to the NFL outside of quarterback. Because with quarterback, the game is a lot faster. The players that you're going up against are more mature. But it's the same thing for, I would say, a corner. Because a corner, you can go up against a wide receiver at, say, Alabama, and they got some speed to them. But they're not really a fluid route runner. They're not going to come in and out of their breaks very well. They're going to drop an easy pass. And so you'll see that. You'll be able to say, well, my coverage rates are fantastic. There are guys in the NFL that literally are slow as hell, but they don't drop footballs, and they win 80-20. So 50-50 balls are actually 90-10 in their favor. There are guys that are just known for their speed. They get off the line of scrimmage, off to the races. You got to prepare for all of them. And it doesn't matter. And you will go against every single one of them. And then you'll go up against freaks like Garrett Wilson that don't drop passes, that are probably one of the top 5 route runners in the NFL, have good speed, and they win at every single point of attack battle, and they don't drop pass. And they win in man coverage. And so a guy like Laster, I think you can say you feel really confident in moving forward. There were some growing pains this year. The secondary has been, for my money, probably the biggest surprise for Houston. I thought that was going to be a weak point. They're currently number 7 in the NFL. They're one of, I believe, 9 teams that are allowing fewer than 200 passing yards per game. And they also are one of 11 teams that rank inside the top 10 plus turnover margin.
Well, that's because there were 2 rookies that were going to start or play significant snaps, and that's usually what happens. A couple more things. Injuries. Who is coming back or who may not come back, and that might cause some further issues. I mean, Christian Harris is definitely the biggest name.
Yeah.
Give me some updates on some of the injuries.
So Harris is expected to be off of the injured reserve. So that 21-day window is expected to open for Harris this week. So the plan was, according to people that I spoke to, they were trying to get him back roughly right before the Detroit game. He wasn't healthy enough, so they said, all right, we're just going to shut it down. We're not going to talk about it. We're going to work him back in after the bye. After the bye week, we're going to take him off the injured reserve. He'll come back to practice. We'll open up that window. All that means is that the window is open. That doesn't mean that he's going to be back against Miami or against Kansas City. The reason they want the window open is because they want him back for the playoff. They want him to be back for this upcoming playoff run, so that way they have a consistent player to go alongside Henry To'oTo'o and alongside Azeez al-Shaair. Azeez is out for the next 3 games. The hit, regardless of how you feel about it, regardless of if you thought it was dirty, regardless if you think that, and by the way, he's not a dirty player. I've been lucky enough to get to know him.
Oh, yeah.
He's a very physical player.
Mm-hmm.
I think that unfortunately, because of the previous fines, the way that he has played the game in the past, the hit against Rashawn Johnson, the hit against Tony Pollard, the one against Josh Allen, eventually it caught up to him, and the NFL decided to uphold a 3-game suspension. His loss is going to be really big because if he can just fit in all these other areas, whether you see him play in the will position, whether you need him in coverage, whether you need him at line in run support, he does a lot of things extremely well that kind of masquerade the mistakes that are found in this Texans defense at times. So I think getting back Christian Harris, a guy that's probably better known for his coverage skills. Last year, he had that big 37-yard interception return for a touchdown against Cleveland Browns in the wild card round. That'll be beneficial. Foley Fotokoski is the only one on defense that right now you have to wonder about if he's going to be able to come back. Oh, Jalen Petrie. Petrie, he wants to play through the injury. So it is a torn pectoral muscle that will require surgery at some point. As of right now, he is looking for a second option. They already ruled him out after, going into the Jacksonville game. They said, nope, we're just not going to try it. The bye week is where we're going to figure out what needs to happen for you. Are you going to be able to come back? Are you going to be healthy enough to play? Are you going to have to get surgery right away, and we're going to shut you down for the rest of the year? They're trying to figure that part out right now. My inclination is he will play again this year. It may not be against Miami. It may be only against Baltimore and Tennessee, and then the playoff run. They're going to give him as much time for the muscle to heal on its own to where he can play with kind of a bandage around it. But I honestly think that he's more of a loss than Azeez al-Shaair is right now because of his ability to play against slot receivers, tight ends, and playing against the run has been super beneficial. people want to look at his tackling numbers the last few years and say, well, he had 147 stops when he was a rookie. He had 5 interceptions when he was a rookie. Last year, he had 0 interceptions. He had like 6 pass breakups. He had like 102 tackles. And then it's like, he only has 68 tackles. Yeah, well, his coverage grade has gone up incredibly. Like if you look at Pro Football Focus, his coverage grade is second to none when he's playing in the nickel than when he was playing at safety. His pass breakups have gone up. He has a career high 8 right now. He's forcing fumbles. His run support is probably the saving grace of this team. So you got to like how he plays the game. And when you're going up against teams that feature running backs like Derrick Henry, feature running backs like Devon Achane, when you're going to face off against Tony Pollard again, you need to be able to have a dude like that. I think that he will play again this year. I just don't know the time limit. So those are the two defensively.
Petrie and Harris.
Yeah. Foley Fodakoski, they haven't put him on the injured reserve, which means that they're giving him time to heal. My bet is that he comes back after the bye week and he's back at practice. Maybe he'll miss the Miami game, but he will be back for the Kansas City game. And he'll be back for the rest of the run. Defensively, they're going to be healthy. Offensively, the loss of Stephon Diggs is just really, really big.
Okay. And in our last few minutes, let's talk about the game next week. Miami, and this is a home game. Houston coming into that 2-3 in their last 5. So Miami definitely coming in a lot better, even though they're coming off a loss to the Packers to snap their little modest winning streak with Tua. Yeah. But Houston is 4-12-1 against the spread in the last 17 as a home favorite. So this is not, and we know they're going to be a home favorite. So this is not usually a good spot for them. Matter of fact, they're 1-3-1 in that role this year, including coming off a loss just a couple of weeks ago, straight up to Tennessee. So talk a little bit about this game, what you expect as far as, matchups, Miami overall, and again, coming off the bye.
There's a lot. Let's start off with the fact that I think Houston just defensively is going to be in a world of trouble because of how quickly this offense can attack, whether it be with Jalen Petrie, whether it be with Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill on the outside. This is a team that has multiple weapons, and they're not afraid to sling it around the yard, and they're not afraid to give you the opportunities for the wide receivers to make plays in space and then work upfield for first downs. They're an up-tempo offense. They're not afraid to run it to the outside. They're not afraid to throw quick strikes and just be able to continue to move the football with ease. That's a big deal. It's a very, very, very big deal, I think, in this matchup specifically because of they have to be able to, I think, stop the run. And if they can't, I mean, they have to be able to stop the pass. I don't know what they do because of Jimmy Ward is currently playing down in the nickel. And I think that Jimmy Ward's been fine, but Jimmy Ward also is a better safety than he is a nickel at this point. Kamari Laster on the outside, he's going to be having to see reps against Tyreek Hill. And it's going to be fairly iridescent to what you saw in the New York Jets game, for my opinion, where New York is going to be a team that has multiple weapons that can strike and take advantage of a young cornerback making plays, which means that eventually you're going to have to throw Kamari Laster on a Jalen Waddle, which may end up benefiting Miami more than it will benefit Houston, because if you have to have Derek Stingley travel and play against Tyreek Hill. Because after that play on the 4th down conversion where Devontae Adams made the big-time grab, there was one more scoring drive where Adams was lined up in the slot. He went up against Jalen Petrie, and it was just automatic. You knew the play was over before it even started. Like, just you're like, all right, what are we doing here? Well, like, why are we having him play on the inside against this guy?
Yeah.
That's going to be the case, I think, in this game where Tyreek Hill is going to make one play against Kamari Laster, and D'Amico Ryan's going to say, nope, we're traveling you. Sting, you got to play against him all day. And so that's going to create more opportunities. Offensively, this might be a game to where you got to utilize your passing attack more. Miami's run defense has been overall decent this year. Nothing to write home about, but definitely they can get some critical stops inside the red zone. You got to trust your special teams. Your special teams, like Haimi Fairbairn, it's so mind-boggling how this season has gone. He has the most kicks in the history of the NFL consecutively of 50-plus yards or more. I mean, that's a record. The guy has 14 consecutive kicks of 50-plus yards. He missed a 28-yard field goal inside against. He missed a 28-yard field goal against Tennessee that would tie the game.
He was not used to it.
I mean, like that's the thing is that this is the same guy that won Special Teams Player of the Year. I mean, Special Teams Player of the Week twice already this season on kicks of 55 or more. Yet he can't make a 28-yard chip shot. So you got to be able to trust your special teams. I think the big thing that you're going to have to wonder about in this matchup is with the questions that you have at defensive end for Miami. Can you win with a quick strike? Can the offensive line hold its block well enough? Because, again, Jalen Phillips has been hurt. Bradley Chubb has been hurt. They haven't been able to generate a pass rush the way that I think Miami thought they would at the start of the year. This is going to be, I think, a very high-scoring game. I think that it can lead to multiple turnovers. Tua has been playing his best version of football, but all it takes is one bad game for you to get right back into your old mechanics. I mean, go look at Jared Goff. Goff had 5 interceptions against the Texans, and they still found a way to lose. So you can create those opportunities for yourself, but this to me just feels like Houston, again, is treading upstream in a very negative light where they're going to get a win over a team that they probably shouldn't, because they lost a game that they probably should have won, and that was the Tennessee game. So they'll make up for it. I don't know if it's Miami. Miami is playing with fire right now. Miami is in the hunt to still be a college football. I mean, to be in the playoff.
Yeah.
There's a very good scenario where when it comes down to if Indianapolis loses some games, they start to gain that momentum. They're right back in the race. It's 10-7. If they go win out, there's a very good scenario where they could win out. I'm not ready to rule Miami dead. I think Miami is going to have some advantages in this matchup.
Okay. So, and again, we talked about how, and is there any particular reason, just as we wrap up here, why you think Houston has struggled as a home favorite? Usually you would look at it as it's pressure, or they're trying to do too much, so there's always those things that you think about of why you're not able to play so well in that role.
Yeah. I don't really have an answer for that. I don't.
I mean, do you feel it? Like, even if you didn't know the numbers, do you kind of feel that? Do the fans feel that? Like, we're favored here in this matchup at home. This is usually not a good spot for us.
No, because at the same time, I feel like the Houston this year just has been disappointing whenever you look at Vegas odds, because they have been favored on the road too, and they've lost. They've only won one matchup on the road this year, so they've only beaten the spread, I think, 2 times this entire season at this point. And one was against the New England Patriots, and once was against the Chicago Bears. And that's it. I mean, they haven't been a team that's played up to a certain brand. And it feels like at this point, taking the points is always a benefactor if you are a gambling man against the Texans, because they'll play close for comfort regardless of who is the competition.
Yeah.
I think that the second half lulls have been a problem. They have. But they've been a problem really only for the last several weeks. I think the fact that you haven't been able to play 4 quarters of consistent football has really hurt you. Whether that be with an unstable run game in the second half, so you're relying too heavily on the pass, whether that be you're giving up too many explosive plays. I mean, the Detroit game is the one where I look back and I say that was where anybody who still believes this team can go on a deep run in the playoffs with the way that they look right now, simply because they went out, they spent money in free agency this offseason, has no idea what they're talking about. Because if you were up by 14, you were up by 17. You were by 17 against the best team in the league.
Yeah.
You had 5 turnovers in that game. And the fact is that you gave up 2 scoring opportunities because of you threw an interception on the very first play of the third quarter. You then threw an interception at the back of the end zone that Carlton Davis got that was supposed to be a touchdown pass for Tank Dell. You created 2 more opportunities with turnovers in the second half. You couldn't score. They scored on both. It's their inability to close out games and play a 4-quarter matchup where the defense is laying them down at times. The offense isn't able to pick up steam. The injuries hurt them at moments. I think that the bye is coming at a very beneficial time. Everyone is getting healthy. They have back Will Anderson. They have back Nico Collins. They have back. They're going to get back Christian Harris. They have back Kamari Laster. Jalen Peach is really the only name that you feel like, yep, that's a really big loss for us. They just got to be able to stay healthy. And that might change, but even still, I'm not even sure that that's enough at this point.
Cole, we look forward to talking to you come playoff time if we get a chance. I know you're going to be real busy, but by then the college football season will be pretty much over, I think. So, we know how busy you are there as well. We have links in the description, so you can check it out, find out anything you want about Cole's content and exactly where to find him on X and so forth and so on. But once again, I appreciate it, and good luck the rest of the season.
Hey, thanks so much, Greg.
You got it, Cole.